What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
So picking up with The Walking Dead Volume 2, again, I like the idea of kind of going back and looking at these older volumes at The Walking Dead because it kind of gives us a perspective in relation to the TV show, as well as how fast things move. Because in this second volume, things that took a year and a half to 2 years to flesh out in the TV show, those happen super fast. It's in the blink of an eye. Like, it's crazy how quick it all happens. But here's the kicker. There are things that happen in the comics that never happen in the TV show. It's kind of crazy when you get to all this. Like, once we get to the cannibals, there's going to be a huge difference between the TV show and the comics. But the fact remains here that, again, we pick up with the death of Shane, because remember, Shane had been killed in the last volume. You know, he was basically shot by Carl when Shane had more or less lost his mind under the belief that the government would come and save them. Now, whether or not Shane actually believed the government would save them is something that we had kind of debated a little bit. It really just seemed to be Shane losing his mind and unable to cope with the fact that Rick was back, that Shane had formed a romantic attachment with Lori, that he believed he was going to be able to bring in Lori and then adopt Carl as his own family. But with Rick's return, all that had essentially gone away. In addition to this, because of the fact that Lori was, had slept with Shane, the idea is that in her mind, in a lot of ways, she's kind of angry at him because Shane tried to kill her husband. And we talked about that. We said that was really the irony of the whole situation, that Lori was with Shane, but as soon as Rick came back, Lori bailed out on Shane, which asked a lot of questions of where her allegiances lie. Was she really interested in Shane, or was it only the idea that she simply needed Shane and he was a means to an end? But as soon as Rick came back, she was quick to take off from Shane and rejoin Rick. Or is it because of the fact that she's loyal to her husband, that Rick is her husband? When her husband comes back, she leaves Shane and goes right back to her husband again, as we would expect. It's really Robert Kirkman asking a lot of questions with regards to the nature of her character and what it is that she's about in terms of how we view her. And so because of this, because of the fact that they've basically been hiding out on the outskirts of Atlanta for quite some time, Rick sits everybody down and says, look, we can't stay here. We can't stay on the outskirts of Atlanta. There's nothing here. Atlanta is a war zone. I mean, that place is filled with zombies. The whole city's dead. If there was anything to be salvaged from there, they could give it a shot. The problem is there are so many zombies, they'd almost never make it out alive. It was a miracle. It was a small miracle they made it out alive last time. And so he says, because of that, the only real solution we have is to take off to the countryside. It's to basically hit the road, cross our fingers, and hope for the best. Now, once they leave Atlanta and they start driving out in the RV, they immediately come across Tyrese. One of the things that I was disappointed about in the show, it took us, what is it, something like 3 seasons, 2.5, 3 seasons, to actually see Tyrese. Tyrese was a hugely contributing member of Rick's group and appeared much earlier in the comics than he was in the TV show. In the TV show, they were on the road for quite some time. Like, the prison had already happened, Hershel's farm had already happened, all those things had already happened, and then we found Tyrese. In this, Tyrese shows up before Hershel's farm, before the prison, before the governor, all those different things, Woodbury and Wiltshire Estates, all that kind of good stuff. Like, it's kind of crazy, but the cool thing about the way that Kirkman introduces him is, keep in mind, and this is something that I hope you notice, Rick is still very trusting in this area, in this point in the comics. Rick is a lot more trusting than he should be. Now, of course, this is something that Lori takes, really makes a note of. She says, look, you can't be so trusting. We don't know anything about this guy. This guy and his daughter, Julie, and her boyfriend, they could be murderers for all we know. You don't know anything about them. But Rick is still not really naive, but he still hasn't been impacted in the nature of the world to such a way that he's become so cynical. Now, he will get that point. We see that right now. In Volume 26, Call to Arms, we'll see that in Whisperer War. We'll see how far down Rick has fallen. But at this point, he's still maintaining some measure of his own humanity, and he holds on to it, as long as he can. But the cool thing is that, the following morning when Tyrese and Rick basically have a conversation about where they come from, what they're about, so on and so forth, they both band against roamers. And this is Kirkman saying the two make a very strong team. I mean, Rick is very capable in terms of his leadership. Tyrese is strong. Tyrese is like a powerhouse in the group, but he's also got his own leadership aspect that will come to bear when he and Rick begin bumping heads with one another. But again, it's really just kind of continuing on this path, moving from one place to the next. And that's really kind of the way it works in this. When it comes to something like The Walking Dead, what Kirkman focuses on is the idea that doing things changes things. Doing nothing keeps things exactly as they are. And what he's basically saying is that if they want to make any kind of measure of a change, if they want to be able to live to see the dawn, they have to keep moving because they're running out of food, they're running out of resources. They're doing the best they can to keep themselves alive, but in the end, they're going to have to find some measure of a safe haven if they want to stay alive for the long haul. And so what happens is with Tyrese and the character of Carol, Kirkman begins to toy with the idea of the two of them becoming romantically attached. And it makes sense. I mean, Carol is really just her. I mean, she's just a single mom at this point. You have Tyrese, who's a single father. It was a matter of time before the two of them just paired up. Please don't spoil anything. Those of you guys watching this, please don't spoil anything. I kind of felt like I shouldn't have said that because now people will. Please do not spoil anything, but in any event, we basically pick up with, with that same night when Lori just kind of wanders off a little bit. And of course, Rick goes to talk to her and Lori says, I'm pregnant. Now, the cool thing about this is we know who the baby's dad, we know who the baby daddy is. We know who the baby's dad is. The cool thing about this though, is that Rick isn't sure. I mean, Rick is just kind of like, I'm pretty sure it's mine, but he has thoughts in the back of his head. Now, what those thoughts are, we'll get to here in a second. But the funny thing is, they go to the group and they say, hey guys, we're pregnant. Now, I never understood the statement of saying like, we're pregnant. The man's not pregnant, the woman's pregnant. So it's like, she's pregnant, but I guess maybe it just kind of makes it look like she screwed up or something like that. I don't really know. I don't get that. But the fact remains is they say, hey, look, we're going to have a baby. We're pregnant. We're going to have a baby. And the cool thing is everybody's just kind of like, now's not a good time to do that, man, because we have no doctors, no hospitals, no method to make sure that the baby is born healthy. It's literally just so the baby's born and we kind of have to hope for the best. But here's the cool thing. This is Kirkman basically kind of showing the reliance on technology, right? I mean, people are like, yeah, everybody's so reliant on technology. Technology will make sure babies are born healthy. Babies were born healthy thousands of years before technology came along. Now, technology made sure that like mothers didn't die in childbirth like so many did, but it doesn't mean the birthing process was it wasn't inherently guaranteed death. The issue here is that they're basically kind of toying with the line. What if Lori gives birth and she contracts an infection? What if she ends up getting MRSA or something like that? She ends up getting a staph infection. There's a multitude of things that can go wrong with her having a child. But while these issues are brought up, while some people voice concerns, in the end, Rick's like, we don't care. Like right now, we're just being happy. We're celebrating the happiness of this moment. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Now, the issue with this is that Rick's not planning. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So you got to look ahead. You got to look to the future and say, hey, look, like we got to find some way to make sure things are taken care of. But then again, it's just now been announced. So I don't know very many people. In fact, a friend of mine just told me that his wife is pregnant. I don't know very many people who were like, yeah, we just found out we're pregnant. And then like, they just quickly snap into like analytical mode and are just like, let's not celebrate. Let's just like focus on the future. Most people are just like, really celebratory, kind of caught up in the moment. The issue with this is that Dale grabs Rick and pulls him aside. While they're putting out the fire, while they're getting ready to move again, he grabs Rick and pulls him into the side and says, hey, look, man, something's not adding up here. Like you were just back for a month. Because remember, it's been a month since the time that Rick first showed up until now. That's something I want you to keep in the back of your head too, because what Kirkman will do is he'll stop giving us time frames. Like it'll just be, and then this happens. And it'll just be a sequence of events, but he won't tell us how long it's been since an event took place. So that's one of the reasons why time in the Walking Dead is kind of ambiguous. But Dale says, look, man, you've only been back for a month. And Rick says, yeah, we've only had sex once. It's like, well, unless it's a miraculous conception, almost no woman ever gets pregnant after having sex one time. It takes time to make that happen. It takes time for people to, for a woman to become pregnant, multiple attempts. And he's like, the only way she could have become pregnant is if Shane was the one that knocked her up. Now, the cool thing is that Rick's like, I acknowledge it's a possibility, but Rick doesn't want to like think about that. And it makes sense. How many men, if they were separated from their wives in some kind of an event or something like that, how many men would want to sit down when their wife comes to them and says, I'm pregnant, and acknowledge the possibility that they're not the father? No man wants to face that choice. And it makes perfect sense that Rick does not want to face that head on, that Rick does not want to acknowledge the fact that his wife basically cheated on him. And so because of this, transitioning, further on as they continue to make their way to wherever it is they happen to, are really, getting to, they ultimately come across Wiltshire Estates. Now, Wiltshire Estates is like this beautiful housing subdivision. I mean, there's massive houses, so on and so forth. And when they arrive, they're like, we're home. I mean, because, you got to think about it. It's a gated community. It's a gated community that nothing can get inside, no one can get out. And for them, when they get here, they're like, one, we're already short on food, so we have to imagine this is a gated community. The gate hasn't been torn down, so the place doesn't look like it's been ransacked. And so because of this, like, the houses probably still have some stuff in them. The houses may be damaged a little bit, but it was probably when people were bailing out, and so it's like they probably left stuff behind, because what Kirkman does when it comes to these circumstances where they come across like houses, different things like that, what he does is he builds up this idea that when the zombie apocalypse first broke out, people panicked and ran. They didn't start grabbing things. They didn't start, going around and grabbing, food, stuff like that. They just grabbed whatever they could grab in the span of a minute or two and then just took off. And so they're kind of looking around like, well, there's got to be canned food, all sorts of things. And so what do is they basically go into one of the houses and they say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take up residence in this house for tonight, and then we're going to basically clear it out, and then we're going to go around and clear out the rest of the neighborhood, go through each of the houses, take care of whatever's in there. We're going to grab all the food that we can find, consolidate it down. Now, that is a genius strategy on behalf of Rick. And this is why Rick is such an effective leader, because while a lot of other people might think emotionally, or while they wouldn't think of all the circumstances, Rick's pretty good at that. Rick's like, okay, what's the most logical course of action? Well, we can't have everybody split everywhere in case there are rumors around here. Then somebody will die and nobody will know, and then suddenly, there's 3 people left and they all end up getting killed. He says we have to stay in the same place. You know, there's safety in numbers, but he also says, looking around here, the place isn't that destroyed, so there's probably stuff here. And so because of this, once they go through the first house, it unfolds exactly as we would expect, in the sense that there's just roamers, you know, and different people being attacked and so on. But once they clear it out, you know, once there's really no loss of life here, but once they clear it out, it's really everybody just Netflix and chilling. That's really what it is. You know, you got Andrea and Dale that pair up, you've got Rick and Lori that pair up, you've got Carol and Tyrese who pair up. You know, everybody's just Netflix and chilling in this house. And it makes sense. And that's why Kirkman's writing, that's why his handling of The Walking Dead is cool, because he focuses so much on character. I mean, you got to think, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, right now in this day and age, we enjoy comfortable. You know, we enjoy knowing that we can go home, lock our door, and what we do in there is basically our own business, that there's a measure of privacy, a measure of safety there. But in The Walking Dead, you don't have that. We're basically people living in the wild. You know, it's like when a dog goes outside, it doesn't go to like a place and then immediately poop. It sniffs around, it finds a location, and when it feels comfortable, when it feels like it wouldn't be attacked by predators, then it goes to the bathroom. That's how people are functioning now in The Walking Dead. It's a very primal, very basic way that people want to make sure they're in a place that's safe, and then they'll let their guard down. And that's one of the reasons why it's so cool, is Kirkman builds this up so well. The problem is that where Donna makes the comment to her husband Alan, and of course Donna will be a character that's not wildly important, but where Donna makes the comment to her husband Alan that everybody's on Netflix and chilling, so on and so forth, and the snow's melting, they'll be able to do a little more exploration in the morning. On the outside of this facility is a sign, and the sign says, "All dead, do not enter." And so this is kind of like, oh God, things are about to pop off. And so the next morning we pick up with Rick and his group. You know, again, they're not aware of what's going on here, but they become aware very fast. But Rick basically says, hey, look guys, we all had a great night's rest, the best rest we've had in quite some time. We're refreshed, you know, we're basically, you know, reinvigorated. We're gonna go to all these houses, we're gonna start clearing them out, but no one goes into a house by themselves. Everybody goes in groups. Now the groups have to be, you know, 2 or 3 people, you know, 3 or more, but it's basically this concept of safety in numbers. The issue is that once Rick gets outside and he goes out to the front of the facility or in front of the housing community, he sees the sign that says "All dead, do not enter," and he panics. While he's running back to everybody else, Donna is immediately attacked by a zombie and she's killed. This results in, of course, her husband Alan freaking out, and of course Rick's like, you know, do not shoot, do not use a gun, do not make loud noises, you'll draw the rest of them. And this is when we find out this entire subdivision is filled with zombies. That I don't know if it was a single outbreak, I don't know if they were all held up in one place, whatever the case may have been, they were presumably letting people in. They let the wrong one in and they turned everybody into zombies. And that seemed to be the case here. That seemed to be what was going on. The problem is that in the middle of all this, it's mass panic, it's hysteria. You have Alan dealing with the death of his wife, and so now he's got his 2 sons to basically raise on his own. Tyrese goes to find his daughter Julie and finds her making out, taking her clothes off with her boyfriend or whatever it is. And so Tyrese is like, all right, we don't have time for this. Like, we just need to get out now. I'll deal with the 2 of you later. And so they basically jump in the RV and they're out of that place quick, fast, and in a hurry. The problem with this is as they make their way down this road, it's one stop after the next, but every time they run into a general store, every time they run into anything that might have any kind of food or any substance like that, they're all destroyed, ransacked. There's really nothing here for them. And so what happens is Rick and his group basically turn to hunting. That's really the only option that they have, is to go about hunting. And this is one of the cool things, is because in the TV show, when it came to hunting, that was one of the reasons why Daryl was such a huge asset, because he and his brother Merle essentially lived off the land. I mean, sure, you know, Merle was a drug peddler, a meth addict, I think it was, but at the end of the day, Daryl was highly capable in terms of his skills. But they don't have anyone like that here. They don't have anyone who's inherently good at hunting. You know, all they have are really city folk that have just kind of been thrust into this impossible situation. And so they do the best they can. But while they're out hunting, Carl is accidentally shot by another guy. Now, of course, we learn that this is the son of Hershel. This is, of course, Otis. And this part, you know, plays out, at least this little segment plays out, much the same way it did in the TV show, that, of course, in response to everything that's going on, Otis says, hey, grab your son, bring him with me. I'll get him back to the farm, get him back to Hershel's farm. You know, we'll get him taken care of. Tyrese runs back to Lori while Lori's, you know, like, what in the heck's going on? He was like, Carl's been shot. And he basically takes her, you know, to where Carl's being taken to Hershel's farm. Now, this is where we start to differentiate. When the various members of Rick's group first showed up on Hershel's farm, if I remember in the season correctly, he didn't trust any of them, and he didn't really want them there. You know, he was like, you can stay here until your son is healed, and then you gotta go. Instead, the way this all plays out here is Hershel is very much a kindly man, and Hershel says, hey, look, I mean, you guys are welcome to stay for the time being. You guys can't stay for, you know, a super long time, but you can stay here, you know, for however long it takes for you guys to get everything in order. You know, if you guys can go out and, you know, with your RV, find a place to live and come back. There's a really deep deep-seated kindness here when it comes to Hershel, as opposed to his character being a little cynical of Rick and his team, just because he didn't really know who they were or what they were about. But the issue with this is that Alan is still very much a grieving man. Alan is still dealing with the death of Donna, and because of that, for him, it's how does he get past that? I mean, how do you get past losing your significant other like that? Not only that, he tells Andrea, where Andrea shows up and says, hey, look, you can't shut yourself off. You have kids to raise. Alan says, yeah, I've been thinking about them. When they get older, they won't remember her face. They'll forget her name because his kids are so young. When she died, they'll forget almost everything about her. They'll remember mom, and they might remember her general outline, her general look, but she'll just become a face in the background of a memory of faces that just kind of blends in. But from here, we switch over to Maggie and Glenn. Now, this is cool because this is the first tried and true interaction between the two. As we know, Maggie and Glenn had one of the strongest relationships, but if I remember, the show did not take the comic route, where Glenn just kind of finds Maggie someone to confide in, just sort of talks to her about the various things he's experienced and so on and so forth. She says, hey, look, if what you're aiming to do is have sex, I'm down. Like, let's just go Netflix and chill. She's like, I'm okay with that, because she's like, my boyfriend's gone. I haven't had sex for a while. She's very cavalier about how she relates to men when it comes to sexual activity. Now, it doesn't mean that she's slept around, but it means that, it doesn't mean that she's promiscuous, but it does mean that she has needs, and those needs need to be satisfied. And so because of this, we switch back over to Tyrese, kind of confronting his daughter and her boyfriend. And this, again, is just kind of Kirkman wrapping things up, it's him basically saying, hey, look, you guys keep your hands off each other. I do not, with everything that's going on, I do not need to deal with the idea of my daughter being sexually active. I do not need to focus on that. I need to be able to focus on the things that matter. We'll talk about this at a later time when we have time. But then we switch back over to Rick, and of course, Rick's talking to Hershel. They're talking about the farm, so on and so forth. And Rick talks about the barn. And what Hershel says is, you do not want to go into that barn. And Rick asks why, and he says, because that's where we keep all the dead ones. Now, this is a marked difference between the TV show and the comics. This was actually a huge source of contention for comic purists who didn't like the changes that were going on in the show. I mean, not all the changes in the show were bad, and I don't really, see myself as like a purist when it comes to The Walking Dead. Not all change is bad. But with regards to this little tidbit, I actually like the way the comic took it, that Rick found out right off the bat that there are dead in the barn. In the show, it was like this dirty secret that no one was supposed to know about, this thing that had been swept under the rug, and Hershel was hiding it from everyone. The issue with this is that when Hershel asked Rick, when Rick responds by saying, you're really keeping zombies in the barn? Hershel says, well, what are you doing with them? And Rick says, we've been killing them. Every time we come across them, we've been killing them. Hershel freaks. He's like, you've been killing them. He's like, why are you killing them? Like, they're zombies right now, but a time may come when a cure will send them back to the way they were before. Now, this is kind of Kirkman playing it fast and loose with the character of Hershel, because we could look at him and say, well, Hershel's just a crazy man. Like, that's all that is. Hershel's just a crazy guy. He's delusional in thinking that a cure can set them back to the way they are. They're dead. So even if a cure somehow managed to restore their physical bodies, heal them, or whatever it may be, like, their brains are gone. It would be every single zombie that wouldn't have a desire to eat flesh, but they would just be stuck in a catatonic state. You'd literally they'd just be brain dead. And so because of that, Rick's like, this is absurd. Like, believing zombies can be cured? No, like, the only thing you can do is you can kill them. Now, the motivation behind why Hershel holds this idea is because his son's in there. And so what seems to have happened with Hershel himself is that where his son Sean had been bitten by a zombie, and his desire was, he was basically unwilling to let his son die, Hershel seemed to develop this idea that, well, maybe his son can be saved. Maybe there'll be a cure. And this singular idea grew into an obsession to the point that he began grabbing every zombie he could find and throwing them all in the same place so he could save as many people as he could find. The problem with this is that Rick's just kind of like, this is crazy. Like, this is absolutely nuts. There's no way that's going to be a possibility. And so what we end up doing is we pick up with Rick, teaching the various members of his group how to shoot guns. Because of course, at this point, it's long overdue. I mean, Rick can't be the sole guy who knows how to use a gun effectively. Everybody in Rick's group has to be able to learn how to shoot effectively in case they get separated, any number of reasons. The problem is that where they're engaging in target practice is in the direction of the Thompsons' farm, of course, according to Hershel. And he says, well, look, I mean, yeah, that house may be vacant. Maybe they're in the barn as zombies, whatever the case may be, but I don't want their property damaged. You can't shoot in that direction. Not only that, when a zombie comes roaming over their way, Hershel begins a process of corralling the zombie back into the farm. The problem is that once that happens, the door basically gets knocked cracked open, and it's an absolute massacre. Zombies are being killed left and right. There's only about a couple people who end up getting killed. Of course, Arnold ends up getting bit by a zombie, one of the children of Hershel, as well as his oldest daughter, I think Lacey rather, ends up being killed. So because of that, his number are kind of dwindling a little bit. They're just sort of torn to pieces, and in the end, Hershel's forced to kill his own son, Sean, as well as his son, Arnold. And so what this does is it kind of sends Hershel to this point of no return, where he initially contemplates suicide in front of Maggie, in front of everybody. Rick knocks the gun out of his hand, and then Hershel crosses this point of no return, where there's no way that he can go back to the way he was before. And he makes this clear. The next morning when they go to see Hershel walks in on Glenn and Maggie having sex. And so Hershel just snaps. He just breaks, right? Because in his mind, you got to think, and he even says this, in his mind, 2 of his kids died. He had to kill his son, Sean, who was already a zombie. And then he walks in and he finds one of Rick's group is with Maggie, and so because of that, he's just like, it's almost like Rick's group is just trying to take over everything that Hershel owns. Now, Hershel basically says, you guys all need to go. Everybody's got to go. Well, then Lori freaks. Lori comes running up on Hershel. She's like, really, you're kicking us out? Like, you're kicking us out of here? Like, you have no idea what it's like out there. You cannot boot us out. And Hershel's like, that's your problem. Rick reiterates the same thing, but it's like, that's your problem. Hershel's stance here is, I'm sorry that you have to struggle out there. I'm sorry that you've got to fight off zombies, but that's your problem. This is my house. This is my land. You can't just show up here and then make some half-cocked argument about a right to life and then believe that you can stay. Now, the cool thing about this is that, again, it creates this cool argument, because under normal circumstances, I would take Hershel's side. I would be like, yeah, sure, you can argue that you have the right to live, and you do have a right to live. You just don't have the right to live here. But it's not like Rick and his team are showing up to be freeloaders. Like, they're showing up and they're saying, hey, look, we want to stay here. We'll be contributing members. Let us live in the house. We'll help you grow food. We'll help you fend off against zombies. We're not just going to loaf around watching TV all day, or, we'll stand in for TV now. Like, we're not just going to rest on our laurels. Like, we'll work hard. Like, we'll contribute to this house. We'll contribute to this farm. This place will become safe. We'll run off bandits, anybody that wants to come here and take our stuff. They're very much contributing. And so it's really this idea that Hershel's just kind of lost it. This especially becomes prevalent when he puts a gun to Rick's head and says, get out of here. You guys need to leave. Now, in response to this, where Rick and his team basically say, okay, fine, we'll go, Otis goes to visit, his father, Hershel, and Hershel says, I think I'm going insane. Like, I never would have killed a man before. I never would have done anything like that. But I put a gun to this man's head. I was going to pull the trigger, and so it's Hershel recognizing his own insanity. It's Hershel recognizing the idea that he seems to be reaching his breaking point. And so again, with Rick and his group, more or less taking to the road, it's back to business as usual. It's struggling to find food. It's struggling to make their way. It's their desire to try to find a place where they can live. And what happens is that as they're going through and as they're trying to find resources, as they're scavenging, looking for something to hunt, we have Rick's attention being brought by Dale and by Andrea as they're, scouting the area. And when he's brought to their location, they end up finding the prison. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. And if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And again, the comics move fast, much, much faster than the TV show. But we're gonna go ahead and wrap this video up, and I will catch you all later. Peace.